Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifey Technologies YouTube channel, and thank you so much for watching and supporting our content. So this is a new series on our channel. If you've been following our videos, we've been focusing more on how to configure routers for different vendors. We have a series that focuses on how to configure Huawei routers, how to configure Nokia routers, how to configure Juniper routers, and we haven't focused or we haven't demonstrated much on how to configure switching devices. So this is a new series, and in this series we'll be demonstrating to you how to configure and manage and troubleshoot different switching protocols on Huawei switching devices. So you know that when you are working, especially in enterprise environment or you working in a data center, you always have switches, many switches in your network. These switches are the one connecting to the user devices, the ones connecting to the servers in the data center, and many other devices that could be connecting to the switches. So you always have to know how to configure, how to troubleshoot, and how to manage these switches. So this is why we are starting a new series, and we'll be primarily focusing on how to configure switches on different vendors, but this series will be for Huawei switches, and then we'll have a different one to discuss how to configure switches on Nokia or on Juniper and even Cisco and any other vendor that we can do the lab simulations on. So this is part one, and in this part one, we'll be doing some basic VLAN configurations. So we know that VLAN, the virtual local area network, they are deployed on our networks, whether you are managing an office network, you are managing a service provider network, we have VLANs configured on many of those devices. So for this part one, we'll just focus on this basic configuration, and the first thing that we need to do is to how to create single VLANs on Huawei switches. And second, how to create many VLANs. So sometimes you need to create 100 or thousands of VLANs on a device. How do you go ahead to create these VLANs on a switch? And then configuring access port. We know that, for example, in this setup, you have PC1 and PC2. They will be configured as access ports. And then we also need to demonstrate to you how to configure trunk ports. So the interconnect between switches or a switch and a router, we always configure it as a trunk port. And then we also demonstrate how to configure the SVI or the VLAN interfaces on Huawei switching devices. So from the topology, you can see that we have three switches. We have switch 3, we have switch 1, and we have switch 2. And we have two PC. We have PC1, which is in VLAN 10, and we have PC2, which is in VLAN 20. We have the IPs configured on the PCs, and then we have the VLAN interface configured on L3. So L3, the switch 3 will be our gateway, and we'll be configuring the gateway IPs using the VLAN interfaces. So between the switches, we'll be configuring them as trunk ports, and then we need to test the connectivity and ensure that PC1 can reach the gateway, PC2 can also reach the gateway. So this is just a simple lab to demonstrate to you how to do basic configurations of VLANs on switching devices. So this is the setup on ENSP, and let me open the CLI. So starting with switch 1, first I will undo the terminal monitor so that it doesn't disrupt our configurations. And then the same way I've been doing on the routers, you also have to configure sysname. So I will call it switch 1. And once you've configured the name, this is just an access switch, so we just need to configure the VLANs and then pass these VLANs on different ports, whether on access port or a trunk port. So we'll go ahead and get the VLAN. So if you just want to create one VLAN, the command is always VLAN, and then you enter the VLAN ID. So you can see that you have the VLAN ID, and the range is from 1 to 4094. So I can create VLAN 10. I can give it, if you use a question mark, there are many parameters that you can configure. I'll just configure the description. Maybe this is IT. quit. If I want to create another VLAN, for example, VLAN 20, I will go ahead and configure VLAN 20, give it a description of HR, and that is it. So if I use the command display VLAN, you can see that we have VLAN 10 and VLAN 20 created. All ports are still in the default VLAN, VLAN 1. So we need to go ahead and bind the ports to these VLANs or add the ports. So for us to add the ports, I've mentioned that for the port that is connecting to PC1, we'll be configuring it as an access port. So configuring an access port is very simple. Interface Ethernet 0/0/2. You need to use the command port link type. So when you use the link type, you can either have access.eq hybrid.trunk. We are just configuring it as access. Only one VLAN will be allowed to pass. And then we need to set the default VLAN. So port default VLAN, I'll call it 10 VLAN 10. So we have finished configuring this port towards the PC. The next thing that we need to do is to now configure the interlink, which we are configuring as trunk link. So for you to configure trunk link, you first need to enter that port 0/0/1, and then same command port link type trunk, and so we need to specify which VLANs are allowed to pass. So it's port trunk allow pass VLAN, and then I've created VLAN 10 and 20. That is it. We have allowed these two VLANs on the two ports, on the one port. So if I display these, you can see that these are the two commands that we need to configure trunk port. We'll also configure Ethernet 0/0/3, same commands. Port link type, trunk, port trunk, allow pass VLAN. This is 10 and 20. So these are the configurations for this interface, and we have finished configuring this layer 2 device. We'll go ahead and do similar configurations on switch 2. So for switch 2, if I just move it to the left, we'll also undo terminal monitor, system. We configure the sysname to ls2. Then we go ahead and create the VLAN. So for us to be able, we don't need to create VLANs one by one. So that's why we will be using the VLAN batch command. So when you run the VLAN batch command, you can specify the VLAN that you want to configure. For example, I can put 10. You can see that I can continue specifying the VLAN that I want to create. If it's in a range, you can use, for example, 10 to 20, something like that. Then they will create VLANs all the way from 10 to 20. But for this one, I only need two VLANs, so it's VLAN batch 10 and 20. That is it. If I display VLAN, you can see that we have two VLANs configured on the switch. So we'll do similar port configuration, interface Ethernet 0/0/2. This is port link type, access, and then port default VLAN. This one will be 20. Quit. We need to configure the interconnect between the switches. So it's starting with Ethernet 0/0/1, port link type, trunk, port trunk, allow pass VLAN. This is 1020. Then we'll go ahead and configure the interface Ethernet /3, port link type. We set it to trunk, port trunk, allow pass VLAN 10 and 20. We have finished configuring these two devices. If you display current configurations, you can see that we have VLAN batch 1020, and we have these ports configured with the necessary commands. So we are configuring this one as an access port. The other ports are configured as trunk ports, so they will be allowed to pass VLAN 10 and 20. And finally, on this switch, So on this switch, this is where we'll be configuring our SVI interface and do terminal monitor sys. Then we need to configure the sysname. This will be ls3. So we have two interfaces, 001 and 002. Both of them will be configured as trunk ports, and we need to allow the two VLANs. So we'll use the VLAN batch command first. Let me clear the screen. So I'll use VLAN batch 1020, and then I will go ahead and configure the interfaces. Interface Ethernet 0/0/1 port link type. As usual, it will be trunk, port trunk, allow pass VLAN 1020. I'll quit and configure the next port 0/0/2 port link type trunk, port trunk, allow pass VLAN 10 and 20. Once we've allowed the VLAN, we now need to go ahead and configure the SVI or the VLAN if interface, which will be the gateway for the two PCs. So for you to create a VLAN if interface, you just need to run the command interface, then VLAN if 10. I will give it an IP address of 10.10.10.10. Mask is 24. I'll go ahead and configure the second SVI interface. So VLAN if 20, IP address 20.20.20.20, mask is 24. If I display IP interface brief, you can see that we have the two VLAN if interfaces. If I display VLAN, you can see that on this we have VLAN 10, it has the two ports, and also VLAN 20 has the two ports. Can also display the same, display VLAN. You can see that we have VLAN 10 and VLAN 20. So you can see that in VLAN 20 we have an extra port, which is gig 002. You can use the question mark display VLAN. If you use a question mark, you have summary. It will give you the VLAN summary, or you can specify the VLAN 10. You can see the details. Use verbose. You can see the interfaces, the tagged ports. These interfaces are up. You can see the VLAN ID, the VLAN name. The VLAN type is a common VLAN description. The status, enable, VLAN state is up. So you can see all these details when you use the display VLAN 10 verbose or the VLAN ID that you want to check. So we've finished configuring the VLANs. We've configured our access port and trunk ports. We've configured our VLAN if interfaces. Now we need to go ahead and test. So on PC1 ping 10.10.10.1, that is the local IP. .10, this is the gateway IP. On PC2 we can also do the same. So I'll ping 20.20.20.1, the local IP. I'll ping also .20. You can see that both gateways are reachable from PC1 and PC2. So if you do a bucket capture on this link, and then I do another ping, let me filter ICMP, and then I do a ping from PC2. So we have packet coming in, and you can see that they are 8.2.1 queue, the VLAN, and then you have the VLAN ID set to 20. If I do a similar packet capture on the other side, we expect to see a VLAN. So on this interface, and open PC1. I also need ICMP, and I'll do a ping on PC1. So you can see that packets are coming through and we have 8 or 2.1 queue, and the VLAN ID is set to 10. So this one confirms that our VLAN configurations are okay. We are able to reach the gateways from the switches, and from the packet capture you can see that the VLANs have been added on the packets. So this is how simple it is to configure to do basic VLAN configurations on Huawei switching devices. Remember that the thing that we did was, if I display current configuration, we created the VLANs using the VLAN badge, and then we went ahead to configure the link type. So this is how you configure the link to be trunk, and this is how you configure it to be access. So I hope you've enjoyed this session. If you've done so and you are yet to subscribe to our channel, kindly hit that subscribe button to support us and also to stay tuned in for more upcoming videos. So this was it for our part 1 of how to configure switches, and I hope to see you in our next episode. Bye.